everybody, and welcome to the Mets Pod live from the Queens Baseball Convention. I'm Connor Rogers alongside my co-host Joe DeMayo, and I gotta be honest, I woke up yesterday, I texted Joe, and I said, what do you want to talk about at the QBC? We knew we were going to do, as we always do, mailbag questions at the end. We knew we were going to get into rumors, because we know how long rumors go with the MLB hot stove. But we were not prepared at the moment for Jacob deGrom to be signing with the Texas Rangers. So this is our first reaction show since the news happened, so I'll kick things off. Joe, what was your instant reaction when you saw the 5-year, $185 million deal for deGrom, not with the Mets, but with the Rangers?
So that text message you talked about, my response was, I guess we have to talk about something about deGrom. Little did I know that meant he was going to be signing at all, let alone actually leaving the Mets. But my initial thoughts on the contract is kind of the thought that the industry had. And I texted a couple people in the game that I know, and the responses were shocked, way more than we expected. The reality is the Texas Rangers are a team right now that are trying to expedite their opportunity to win. They lured Bruce Bochy out of retirement to be their manager, and they didn't do that for Bruce Bochy to see through a Texas Rangers rebuild. So in order to get Jacob deGrom to go to Texas, they knew they had to go above and beyond, and that meant 5 years. And you know, I don't blame the Mets one bit for not doing that. I think the Mets made kind of the offer that I would have made. So according to Joel Sherman, it was 3 years and $120 million, $40 million a year. Like that to me is perfectly fine for deGrom. You know, you could have made the argument to go a 4th year or something, but now that circles back to the idea of he didn't give the Mets the chance. He took the deal from Texas and went. So did Jacob deGrom just simply want to leave the Mets? And that's a question that I don't think we know the answer to, but it certainly is kind of at the front of my mind now.
It has to be, if you're a Mets fan. I think when you look at it with deGrom, the fact was, we've heard the rumors for a long time that maybe he didn't want to be here. We knew he hated his contract and was going to opt out of it. He had every opportunity he had. He said he was going to do that, and that's his right to do. That's why you structure those contracts that way. That's why you set yourself up to hit free agency. And we're going to get into what next for the Mets in a bit, because we know they've been tied to Justin Verlander. We know a little bit about meeting with Carlos Rodon, Kodai Senga. But the conversation stays with deGrom, because I'm with you, Joe. We've talked about this on the Mets Pod a lot. We were prepared for a scenario where, one, deGrom gets a deal that the Mets were not comfortable going to. And the Mets were never comfortable going to, forget 5 years. The constant discussion we had was, will the Mets go to 4 years? We saw the 3-year deal for Max Scherzer, and really the 3rd year is the option. And then when you factor in the Mets on this timeline where they're trying to replenish the farm system, they're trying to stay young in certain areas, and with the veteran big contracts they give out, they stay to in a 2, 3, 4-year window. We saw the bridge deals really with Escobar and Canha last year. Different market, but still the term matters. We saw the deal with Marte get to 4 years. deGrom's injuries, the amount of term in this deal, and the most important thing that you said, the fact that maybe he just didn't want to be here anymore. If you're a Mets fan, you can, kind of put things in a vacuum, right? You could say, this does diminish deGrom's legacy with the team a little bit, but you can appreciate how great of a New York Met Jacob deGrom was. And you can also look forward to, the Mets now have, estimate $40 million in their budget that was supposed to go to deGrom that will be used to make this team better to try to win a World Series in the next 2 years.
That's a huge key, is that this money is going to get repurposed. I think in the past, when free agents left and they had, they got big money deals elsewhere, the concept was the money might not get reinvested. We know this money is going to get reinvested, and it's okay. Like, I'm not telling Met fans how to feel, right? Like, from an emotional standpoint, Jacob deGrom spent his whole career here. He's frankly a Mets icon.
Absolutely.
And it's okay to feel sad that he's gone. I'm sad that Jacob deGrom's gone. I mean, when you think about, just from the business side, it's a different conversation, but it's okay to be upset that he's gone. But also, on the other side, who here really wanted to give 5 years with a 6-year option to Jacob deGrom, who's a guy who made 38 starts over the last 3 seasons, in his mid-30s, locking him up until near 40 years old? To me, I couldn't have done that if I were the Mets.
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks so much about limitless money for Steve Cohen, yet there is still luxury tax penalties, there is still a budget this team will operate on, there is still at least a sense of, in 5 years, you can't have a ton of guys that are in their late 30s, either declining or breaking down, sometimes both, unfortunately, on these massive contracts, and then you have to pivot elsewhere, but you need that young talent as well. So it's a decision that, unfortunately, does have emotion in it because of how great of a New York Met Jacob deGrom was. Nobody will ever deny that. But sometimes you have to take the emotion out of baseball decisions, and now the Mets have to move forward, and the Mets need to find the answer in this rotation that only includes Max Scherzer, obviously Cookie Carrasco. We're going to see if David Peterson gets written into that fifth spot, which we think he's earned at this point. But Joe, there are clearly now major holes in this rotation. I'll start with this. How would you attack the market that deGrom does not sit on anymore?
So Billy Epler certainly has a lot of work on his hands. I mean, we're going to talk about the rotation, and we'll get into the bullpen a little bit. They basically need a bullpen. They have a decision to make on Brandon Nimmo, but at the rotation level, I'm pivoting directly to Justin Verlander. To me, I think the deGrom contract is probably a baseline of what Justin Verlander might accept. What the Mets offer, 3 years, about $120 million. Is it a year too long on Justin Verlander? I would say yes. But I think what is evident in this free agent market is everything is going to be a year more than it should. And you're absorbing some risk, but you're trying to win now.
That's free agency.
Yeah,
there's
that's
risk in every free agent move.
Yes. So I'm going Justin Verlander. I'm trying to repurpose that money there. Carlos Rodon is the next one on the list. We've talked about this on the Mets pod. I am not as much of a Carlos Rodon guy as some other people. I think there's a lot of injury risk there based on recent history.
Let's go right there, because I think you've outlined this really well on Twitter, and I understand why a lot of people, including myself, don't always have a grasp with this. There are also penalties that come with signing Rodon that impact the balance of trying to also supplement a farm system that was bare bones when the new ownership got here.
Whenever I put this on Twitter or talk about it, I just assume there's a bunch of people looking at their phone and rolling their eyes at me, because we know Mets fans and baseball fans in general don't pay attention as much to the MLB draft. They don't care as much about farm systems. It's what I do. So
it's you.
Yeah,
you're the one.
That's what I do. I am the one. But when you sign a player that received and rejected a qualifying offer, and you exceeded the luxury tax like the Mets did, and will continue to do for years going forward, the penalties for signing him cost your second highest pick and your fifth highest pick in the next draft, as well as $1 million in international bonus money, which is the money that you signed Francisco Alvarez with, where you signed Alex Ramirez with. And in the Mets case, because they did not sign their third-round pick from last year, Brandon Sproat, a right-handed pitcher, it'd actually be their second and fourth highest pick, and $1 million of bonus money, and Jacob deGrom signed for 5 years. What makes you think Carlos Rodon is signing for anything less than 7 years? 6 years, 6 or 7 years. And this is a guy that he was fantastic in 2022. There's no way around it. 2021, he had a really good season too. But down the stretch, his arm was fatigued. He was throwing 91 to 93 miles an hour. The White Sox at the time didn't even deem him worth a qualifying offer, the 1 year of $19 million. Is this a guy that I'm looking to give $25 to $30 million a year over 6, 7 years? In addition to the penalties are secondary, right? Like if they want to sign Trey Turner or Aaron Judge or someone like that costs them draft picks, go ahead. Like that's a different conversation. But to me, I'd rather take my chance on Justin Verlander on a shorter term, higher AAV dollar contract, and no draft picks associated, than the long term and everything that comes with Carlos Rodon.
It's going to be fascinating because I think a lot of Mets fans are hoping for, and I'm definitely one of them, if they get a frontline guy, right? It's get somebody that you have two bulldogs at the top of the rotation, Scherzer, whether it's Rodon. I understand there's plenty of risk there, and it's outlined really, really well. Verlander, of course, because he matches that theory of get a guy in a bridge deal where we're not attached to this money for the next 7 to 8 years. It's 2 to 3 years, and when it's up, it's up. Let's be real, there's a chance that Verlander goes to the Dodgers. The Mets are not comfortable giving Rodon 7 years if that market gets there. Quantity outlook instead. Scherzer's your number one, and then you try to bring back a Bassett, and you go get Kodai Senga. Is that something that can work for a team trying to win over 100 games again, where you have, and let's be fair, deGrom didn't pitch a lot last year, and I think a lot of people often forget that this team was really good for a long stretch without him, a long stretch without Scherzer. Is there some argument, is there some rightful push for getting more arms that aren't all $30 to $40 million a year?
There definitely is, and that opens up that payroll flexibility to pursue offensive upgrades, because while we focus a lot on the Braves series at the end, no question, like they had the opportunity to clinch the division, or essentially clinch the division in Atlanta, and they got swept. Then you have the wild card series with the Padres. The pitching let them down. But if you think back to the last month and a half of the season, the offense let this team down. And when you look at the contracts, basically everybody's under contract except Brandon Nimmo. So you're bringing back largely the same offensive team, just on the premise of their contracts. So it's not required that you have two aces to win. If there was one way to win a World Series in baseball, everyone would
replicate.
Yeah, everyone replicate it. There's no one way to do it. So could the Mets, Justin Verlander, I know he has a home in the LA area, and his wife Kate Upton, California type of person.
We're on home watch again.
Yeah.
We did it with Scherzer last year. You gotta love it.
Yeah, so hey, her treating Philly fans the way she did, maybe that gives me some hope that she would love to continue to do that with Justin in a Mets uniform.
Upton to Queens.
But if, he could go to the Dodgers if he does. My opinion is clear. I would not heavily pursue Rodon, and I would go Chris Bassett, Kodai Senga, Jameson Taillon. There's arms like that. Like, you can get a couple of those, and then I would go after the offensive market. I don't care if it's deemed unrealistic. I don't care about Steve Cohen and Hal Steinbrenner being friends or whatever. Like, I would push for Aaron Judge. What do the Mets need? Right-handed power. What does Aaron Judge provide better than any player in baseball? Right-handed power. But if it's not Judge, Trey Turner's out there who could have the flexibility. He played second base when the Dodgers acquired him, and Corey Seager was already in place at short. He could play center field. He's done that in the past, so there's some versatility there. And then Carlos Correa is another one that stands out to me. He played third base in the World Baseball Classic next to Francisco Lindor. So he could do that again. And Escobar could shift to second. McNeil could shift to the outfield. I think the Mets need to find a way to get more thump in this lineup. And DH is obviously a possibility as a right-handed complement to Vogelbach. But I wouldn't be afraid to try to upgrade elsewhere with power as well.
It's funny when we have the Trey Turner conversation, because he's excellent at obviously stealing bases, getting on base, making contact. Defensively, he's a great player. It often gets overlooked that this is somebody who's come pretty close to 30 home runs recently. Trey Turner is not going to hit over 30 home runs year after year. That's not who he is. But I think he's so good at everything else that it gets overlooked that he would still add thump to this lineup. And Joe, kind of where I wanted to transition here, and we'll get back to it with Nimmo in a second, but you said there's a chance that the Mets, with the way the contracts are constructed, are almost running back the same lineup. The conversation that we often forget is, what kind of difference does Francisco Alvarez make? What kind of difference does Brett Beatty make? What kind of difference does Mark Vientos make if he's actually given the opportunity to DH? You do prospect coverage and MLB draft coverage, especially with the Mets, better than anybody in the space. What are your fair expectations for those guys? Because they had especially Beatty and Alvarez, who are very, very young, they had a meteoric rise through the system to even have a cup of coffee with the big league club.
To be honest, I think Francisco Alvarez should be on the opening day roster one way or another. Whether that is you are using him as the right-handed complement to Daniel Vogelbach at DH, or in a more ideal world, you find a way to shed James McCann and as much of his money as you possibly can.
Thanks, Texas.
And
deGrom, fight for him.
That's the
fight for James McCann.
He had an ERA of 1.7 with James McCann catching him. So feel free to take him off our hands. And I want to see Francisco Alvarez behind the plate. Yes, does he need growth defensively? Absolutely, there's no question about it. He's a 20-year-old kid whose offense is at a major league level, and his defense is probably at a AA, AAA level, right? But the only way you're going to get better is by doing it. if you want Francisco Alvarez to be your long-term catcher, it's hard to justify DHing him for the entire 2023 season, and then in 2024 saying, yep, well, you're ready to catch now. Like, he's not going to get the reps. So I wouldn't be afraid to take the risk on him defensively. One thing I always hear from people is, oh, the Braves, they just keep churning out these young players. Well, guess what? They play these young players. They play Vaughn Grissom.
From Double-A.
Yeah, they're calling them up and they're giving them the opportunity. The Mets need to be not afraid to give an opportunity to someone like Alvarez. Beatty, for me, I think I would probably start him in AAA because I'm comfortable with Eduardo Escobar at third base, or, you know, if they do pursue Carlos Correa, which is an outside-the-box idea, then third base is kind of locked in there. But Beatty, when he got called up, he had 6 games of AAA experience. So I think if he has the opportunity to go back there and further refine his skill set, I think that would be advantageous for him. And the Mark Vientos question is the one that we don't know. Like, how do the Mets feel about Mark Vientos? When the Mets traded for Daniel Vogelbach at the beginning of July, Connor and I were on the Mets pod every single week saying, bring up Mark Vientos. We need to see if he's able to be the right-handed complement to hit left-handed pitching, which is all that he's done in the minor leagues, is crush left-handed pitching. The Mets refused to do so, and then they traded everything they traded for Darren Ruff, and we all know how that worked out, not particularly well. And then they call up Vientos finally, and he just doesn't play. He got called up because Starling Marte got hurt, and he was just like the next closest guy on the 40-man roster. So I wonder how they feel about Vientos, and it won't shock me if Mark Vientos' name is the name you're hearing in trade talks at the winter meetings next week.
I think that's the thing that's the hardest to gauge for fans, for even media, is what does the trade market look like? I think everybody sitting in this room was surprised by the Chris Bassett trade last year. The trades just come out of nowhere so often in baseball, especially the trades that don't happen at the deadline. Because you hear the same names attached to the deadline. In the offseason, it's kept much more under wraps. But back to Alvarez, I believe the Mets got 6 home runs out of the catcher position last year. 6.
Yeah.
If Alvarez hit 22 next year, 15 to 22 home runs, we talk about thump for this lineup all the time. Where are you going to get thump? Especially if you don't go out and pay for it, you don't go out and trade for it. Maybe a full season of Vogelbach gives you a tiny boost. Maybe you have a bigger season, although Pete had a great season, so it's not really fair to expect more from Pete. That's where the thump comes from. The difference of 6 home runs from 2 catchers with a guy, a kid, who can give you 20 plus as a rookie.
He absolutely has that power, and you know, when you look at Francisco Alvarez when he was coming through the minors, he truly had all the same metrics that Pete Alonso has on his home runs. When you're talking exit velocity, when you're talking launch angle, when you're talking just pure barrel control and able to square up a baseball, there are few people in the minor leagues that do it as well as Francisco Alvarez, and that's why you see him ranked as the #1 prospect in baseball across many of, you know, MLB pipeline places that you look at. If he's not #1, he's right up against it. The power potential is legitimate. I mean, he could be a 30-plus home run guy without question to me, and it's just a matter of what does the defense become. They don't need him to be Yadier Molina behind the plate. He just can't be Gary Sanchez behind the plate.
Average would be a huge win. And he has a big arm.
And he has a big arm, which is his best defensive trait, is he can throw runners out, which if you think back to like when we were younger, that's how we judged defensive catchers based on their throwing ability. And that's why
frame statistics.
And that's why Mike Piazza always got such grief for his defense, is because he would like almost hit a pitcher when he was trying to throw a guy out at second. But his pitch framing, his blocking, Mike Piazza modern day would be considered a plus catcher.
That's it.
So it's a different time, but Alvarez can throw. He needs work on his framing. He needs work on his pitch blocking. But the reality is, like I said, he's a 20-year-old kid. Most catchers his age are in low A, single A. They're not even sniffing the big league, so he's just a very advanced player.
Before we get to the mailbag, which is going to be great to have it live here, so if you have questions, start thinking of them. We'll get people up to ask questions. We're going to get there in just a bit.
Get John, and he'll get a mic.
Yeah, he will absolutely take care of it. Let's talk Brandon Nimmo. It's funny how Nimmo was kind of the hottest name at the start of free agency. I think we heard up to 6 teams connected to Brandon Nimmo. The Rockies were the first non-Mets team involved. We heard the Yankees looking at Brandon Nimmo. we know Nimmo's value. Nimmo, besides being well-liked in the clubhouse, his enthusiasm, his positioning in center field, his ability to work long counts, he didn't have a Brandon Nimmo year in terms of being a 400 on-base kind of guy, but he's a table setter. What do you think Nimmo's market looks like in terms of overall term on the contract? Because this is a player who unfortunately missed a lot of time in his 20s, is coming off a year where he was healthy and was very good. Now will be 30. Are we looking at 5, 6, 7 years for Brandon Nimmo?
I'd say you're looking in the 5 to 6 range, and I think he's going to be in the neighborhood of $23 to $25 million a year. Like, I think he's going to be almost George Springer money. I think that's kind of the idea of where he's at. And is he as complete a player as George Springer? No, he's not. But if you don't sign Brandon Nimmo, your next best center fielder on the market is Cody Bellinger, who got non-tender. It's going all defense, like Kevin Kiermaier, and getting offense elsewhere. So I think Nimmo's in position where he's going to get a lot of money, a lot of years, and there's going to be a lot of teams interested, because the reality is center field is not the strongest position across the sport. There's a lot of teams that are kind of faking it in center field, and Nimmo has clearly made strides that he's a genuine center fielder at this point. So with deGrom out the door, that could increase the possibility of Brandon Nimmo returning to the Mets. If they miss on Justin Verlander, if they don't want to go the Carlos Rodon route, do they add some pitchers, bring Brandon Nimmo back, upgrade DH, and call that your kind of changes on the offensive side? It's just, the big thing about the whole deGrom thing is it just opens up all these possibilities, and it's a huge positive for the Mets that deGrom decided when he did. He decided before the winter meetings, so the Mets now know. They don't have to sit back and wait and say, all right, well, we have this $40 million earmarked for Jacob deGrom, so you can only wait so long. And he made the decision for them, and I wish him the best. Good for him. He got the contract he wanted, and he's Texas bound. Now it's on Billy Epler, it's on this front office, it's on the analytics team, it's on all of these people to make the Mets a contender. And that's their job right now.
One more here, Joe, before we get to the questions. Let's talk situations if Nimmo is not back, right? Do you move Marte to center field, which I know Epler has said they are comfortable with that scenario. You look for some corner pop, whether that's on the trade market. We've seen a lot of names moved already from the corner outfield spot. Teoscar Hernandez, Jesse Winker was just recently moved. There's always corner outfielders with some pop available on the market. Do you ponder a reunion with Michael Conforto? We've made the running joke on the pod about the fences in right field moving in a little bit. How many home runs does Conforto get now? And he's going to be taking what we call the pillow contract, probably that one-year deal, a place he's been comfortable before. The non-Nimmo world, Brian Reynolds has been a trade name candidate. How do you kind of lay that blueprint out?
I find it hard to believe if they let Nimmo go out the door that they're going to have another center fielder come in. And I think Billy Epler talking the way he did early on almost made me feel like they don't have confidence that Brandon Nimmo is going to be returning, because every chance he got over the few day span that he spoke, he mentioned Marte as a center fielder. And if
leverage, baby.
Yeah.
You gotta have that leverage.
Yeah, leverage is a part of it, but I think it's also genuine to a degree.
I agree.
That they know that they have that option. Like you said, the corner outfield market, we don't know what's out there in trade too, right? Like, we sit here, we go on MLB trade rumors or whatever, and we look up the free agent list, and we just assume that's who teams have to choose from. We don't know who's actually going to be available in trade. Like, I didn't know the Blue Jays were trading Teoscar Hernandez. They just did. Right? So there's options in the trade market that we can't identify yet. Mitch Haniger's a name to keep an eye on. He was, way back in high school, a Mets draft pick that didn't sign, went to college.
Good choice by him.
Yeah,
worked out.
Yeah, and he's a guy that hit 39 home runs in 2021. He's dealt with some injury stuff, so that's right-handed thump if that's what you're looking for. He's a corner outfielder. Marte go to center. They have some options, and it's just the center field ones are very limited unless you are all in on a Cody Bellinger rebound.
Haniger is a great name to bring up. When you look at his splits against lefties, something that has plagued the Mets for it feels like years now, hitting against lefties, hitting with pop against lefties. Haniger is somebody that his splits against lefties are tremendous, so that might be a very underrated name for the team.
And when you talk about Conforto too, I forgot to mention him. I'm hearing Conforto's actually going to end up with a multi-year deal with an opt-out after year 1. So it's
protects him.
Oh, yeah, it protects him in case it doesn't work out. But I've heard his market is actually pretty hot, and he's looking at maybe 3 years with an opt-out after 1. And I don't know how involved the Mets will be, but Billy Epler should be involved in everything. And I appreciate the no comments on things that Billy Epler did the other day. I know it irked a lot of people, but keep it in-house. Let us know what you do. I don't need to hear about what you're planning to do. Just tell me what you do.
Just make the moves. Just make the moves. All right, let's go to the mailbag right now. Let's get a couple questions up here because we want to hear from you. And thanks so much for everybody for sticking around and listening to us. We really appreciate it. A reminder, you can subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Mind you, you all have phones, so take them out and subscribe now if you don't already. I mean, you're here. I'm watching you.
That's great advice. I mean, you can subscribe to the podcast right here, right now. We are going to do questions like we have been doing, only this time for your benefit and for their benefit. Myself and Megan are going to have mics. We're going to work either side of the room. So if you've got a question for these guys, just raise your hand and we will walk over and make sure that you are mic'd up. So if anybody's got a question, you there in the back, Megan will work her way back to you. And we'll try to bounce back and forth. If you have questions, get that hand up. Over-under on Jacob deGrom questions for you guys.
Oh, God.
Not a deGrom question.
All right.
Oh, perfect.
0 for 1. There's 1.
How would you resolve the state of the Mets catching situation? I don't think it will go another year with McCann.
Yeah.
The way last year.
You want to start? I would say I'd do everything in my power to get James McCann off the Mets. And I feel really mean saying that, but if it means I have to eat half of his contract to trade him somewhere, I'm willing to do that. I want to see the reins move towards Francisco Alvarez, and Tomas Nido is a perfectly competent backup who obviously was a Gold Glove finalist this year, but the future of the catching position is Francisco Alvarez, and I'm ready to start the future because you see all these other teams seemingly willing to do that. Like I mentioned Atlanta just a few minutes ago, how they bring these guys up from AA and let them play.
Baltimore did that last year.
Well, yeah, with Adley Rutschman, so that's a great point. But
And Connor Henderson.
Bring them up, let them play, and deal with the growth defense, because that's the thing. He needs growth defensively. He's not incompetent behind the plate. He just needs growth, and the only way you get better is by doing it. So that's what I would try to do.
Yeah, and I would say that they will make a significant effort to get McCann off the roster. He's owed $24 million over the next 2 years. Joe and I were talking about this before the show. Maybe there's a team out there that will eat half of it. So you eat half of it and you make it an expiring contract. That means it frees up $12 million for the year 2024. That would go a long way, but the most important aspect is getting Alvarez to play, taking the training wheels off, and then it moves Nido as a backup catcher, where Nido has a lot of value as a backup. It feels like we pick in the holes of his game when he's a starter. That's easy to do, but he's a capable backup.
Yeah, very capable backup, and like I said, was a finalist for the Gold Glove. I have visions of the catching position for the next few years being Francisco Alvarez and Tomas Nido, and why aren't you starting it now?
All right. I think they're running around.
All right, we got a question back here.
Yeah, I just wanted to know your thoughts. Injured Chafin seems to have made a lot of sense for a while. Have you ever heard any rumor like that? Does just not want to play anymore?
We have had the Andrew Chafin combo since before we were partnered with SNY, a favorite of the Mets pod. It's a great question because you look at the fit and it's a perfect fit. They need a lefty, he's lights out. I thought he would have been perfect at the trade deadline. The guy has a track record that's not just a flash-in-the-pan reliever year. He's been really good for a really long time right now. And this is a bullpen that after Edwin Diaz and Drew Smith, there are a lot of question marks right now. We hope Adam Ottavino's back. Maybe being a local guy will play into that. Even if you get Ottavino back, you still need a lefty in the pen. You still need an impact arm in the pen. Chafin's perfect. And if it doesn't happen this year, I'm convinced it'll just never happen, because you're absolutely right that we've been thinking about this guy as a Met for 2 free agencies ago, last free agency, and every trade deadline. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, if it's not now, it's basically never, right? Like, I don't think the Mets were as heavy on him as a free agent. Hate to bring it to this, but it's public information, so it's not crazy for me to say, but his vaccination status was a factor in his free agency, and that did actually take some teams out of play. And then at the trade deadline, Detroit didn't move him, so it's not like they were willing to give him away. And
then he opted out.
Yeah, and then he opted out, so he's a free agent now. I don't know, to your question, does he just not want to play in New York? I'm not sure about that, but the Mets ought to make a push for someone like Andrew Chafin, because I think when you have a guy like Joely Rodriguez, who pitched for them last year, they need to get better at the left-handed relief spot. And if that's an Andrew Chafin, that's fantastic. Or maybe it's big fish hunting, because you and I have talked about on the show that, yes, the bullpen's going to be largely off under-the-radar guys, but can you sign a Taylor Rogers to be a setup man, Edwin Diaz? It's a more expensive thing, but that's a lefty who also could be the setup man. I'd like to have a lockdown 8th inning next to Diaz.
Yeah, who's getting the ball to Edwin Diaz? And the pitching staff's going to look a lot different, so that might put more pressure on your bullpen. So I'm with Joe all the way, and it's something that we've discussed quite a bit.
Can we get another question down there?
Do you think Edwin Diaz can repeat last season in the future, or was best season repeat?
I think it's probably unrealistic to expect him to be basically perfect, right? That's what he was in 2022. With that said, I have zero qualms. I am the Edwin Diaz guy. If you know me, I've been the Edwin Diaz guy even when
he was down bad.
Yeah,
you had his back.
Down bad. So me and Edwin are simpatico here, but I don't think it's not necessary for him to repeat 2022 necessarily. As long as he's a very reliable closer that takes the ball every time he gets it and gets the job done, I believe he's going to be able to do that. I just don't know if he's going to be quite as perfect as he was in 2022.
And I think the most important thing he proved this year is just the battle against adversity, right? The pressure in New York, especially after the miserable season he endured early on in his career with the Mets, I think it shows a confidence level with Diaz that's the most important trait of a closer. Your composure, your confidence. Edwin Diaz has completely found that again. And if he's a top 3 closer, top 5 closer in baseball throughout that contract, it's worth it because that market is going to explode soon. Yes, he got the record-setting deal. He's not going to hold that title for very long.
Yeah, I was just going to say, things are record-setting until they're not. And there's going to be a time that someone passes what Edwin Diaz got. But we all know what it was. Narco just unlocked him, and it unlocked everybody. Everyone loves Narco, and yeah.
It's great for Citi Field.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, the entertainment factor. Diaz brings an entertainment factor, and it is an entertainment sport at the end of the day.
We got 2 questions here.
I just want to see, why did Jerry Seinfeld hate the Narco thing so much, though?
Oh, God, I don't know. I don't know what's up with Jerry.
Some people don't like fun.
Narco was on my Spotify Wrapped.
All right. Forgive me if you guys touched on this already, but there are reports that the Mets might go internally with a DH. Do you see that as more of Francisco Alvarez, Brett Beatty, or do you see it as Vogelback or Vogelback generally the bench bat, and Connor are the Jets being the Bucks on?
Should I start with the Jets one?
Yeah, hit the
Start with the Jets one.
I keep it honest with the Jets. I picked them to win tomorrow. I did pick the Jets to win tomorrow. I think they'll be able to throw against Minnesota, and I think they know they're desperate with playing Buffalo the next week. They'll be ready to roll. Throw to you for the DH.
I think Alvarez could be the DH situation. Like I said, just called Minsko. I'd like him to be the catcher instead, but I think the DH is a fallback opportunity for him. Brett Beatty, I don't think so much on the DH side. He's a left-handed hitter. I do think the Mets are comfortable with Daniel Vogelback as the lefty part of a DH platoon.
Nailed it.
Yeah. But I do think they're comfortable with the Vogelback half there. They need to be better on the right-handed side. They did not show any confidence in Mark Vientos. So I don't know if he's necessarily part of it. I would be going to the free agent market and spending some money. Check JD Martinez's back. If his back is okay, bring him in and let him be that half of the DH.
And it's such an interesting question because there's so many scenarios where they can do the puzzle piece route where I know Escobar had a tough start to last year. He was great against lefties. So maybe Escobar, when he's not playing in the field, what if they went out and got Trey Turner or Carlos Correa? That takes a spot away from where Escobar would play. Escobar is an effective right-handed DH against lefties, and then you have Vogelback against righties. So it's such a layered conversation conversation that it feels like we need that first signing to know the answer. But to really answer your question, I'm not sold on it. The roster right now is the DHs, where it's Vogelback, maybe Alvarez, maybe Darren Ruff. Like, I don't believe that at all. I think it'll be quite the mix of players. And sometimes you need to answer that question in April. Sometimes maybe you don't know the answer until June. You find out along the season when you're still in it. It's still early. It's still safe to be figuring things out.
Some great questions so far. Just want to make a quick announcement. Sorry to interrupt you guys. Anything last call for the Ari Digby autograph signing? So if you've already paid for that and you haven't gotten online, now would be a perfect time to do that. Just wanted to make that announcement. And you, sir, what's your question for the next part?
So Brian Reynolds is requested a trade from the Pirates. What would it take for the Mets to potentially trade for a guy like that?
He requested a trade?
I just asked him a few minutes ago on Twitter, according to Ken Rosenthal.
Okay.
Number one, that's awesome.
All right, great.
Brian Reynolds is a great player.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw to Joe for the trade package in a second, but I think when you look at Brian Reynolds, there's been a lot of creative trade packages. He will be an expensive player because he plays center field. His offensive upside on a real baseball team, not whatever the Pirates trot out there every year, is significantly higher. And Joe, I know you know the prospect pool better than anybody. What do you think it would cost? Because if they can't get Nimmo back, I think he is the perfect pivot player. And I know it's going to be expensive, but I think Reynolds is somebody that can come here, bat in the 2-hole if you need him to, up and down the lineup. He's under team control for the next 3 years. Maybe with that trade request, he wants to be in a big market, a team that cares about winning. That's what that tells me. I would love to see it happen.
I think it would be a big cost, like you said. Francisco Alvarez is off limits to me. I'm not trading Alvarez for anything short of Juan Soto, right? Like, pretty much. So I'm keeping him. I'm not in a rush to move Brett Beatty either. Kevin Parada, I think, is a guy that we could talk about. Though I wonder if the Pirates want a guy like Kevin Parada because they used the #1 overall pick on a catcher a couple years ago in Henry Davis. But Parada's probably like the top trade chip that I would move. And then you look at Alex Ramirez, who has sky-high ceiling. I said on a podcast, I was on with Evan Roberts earlier this week, that I think this time next year, Alex Ramirez is going to be a top 25 prospect in baseball. So he's a guy I could see the Pirates being all about. And then Ronnie Mauricio is having a huge winter ball, and I think his fit with the Mets is peculiar. They haven't tried him at different defensive positions, which he needs to do if he wants to play for the Mets. I mean, he's only been a shortstop. The Mets have a shortstop. So maybe he interests them. Mark Vientos, like, I think it'd be a mix of kind of those close to big league ready guys like a Vientos or a Mauricio, and then maybe Parada and Alex Ramirez are guys that are of interest. But it's tough to put together a trade package because you could look at my top 20 list on SNY.TV and that'll give you a guide of where prospects are ranked. But these teams all have their own assessments. Like, the Pirates could love Ronnie Mauricio and the Twins could hate Ronnie Mauricio.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter where I tell you they're ranked. So it's just a matter of their assessment, but it would be a big cost ultimately.
And I think the biggest variable too is where do the Pirates think they are? Because if the Pirates think this is the year where they turn the corner with an O'Neal Cruz and some of the young talent they've been playing, even if you don't agree, teams view themselves differently than the general public. Maybe they want a prospect plus a major league player. They don't take on money, so you're not going to unload a Marcana. But is there going to be major league players in the package too? Because Brian Reynolds plays every day. So that's a big spot to replace one of their most productive players of the last couple of years.
Maybe they want a Tyler McGill or someone like that. Maybe they want a big
cost-effective big league arm. Yes.
Got a question in the back?
Yeah, so I know that Paul was here, heartbroken over it. But at the end of the day, within 101 games last year, he only won 5 of them. He started in like 33 games the past 3 seasons. I know that's counting the over year and all that nonsense. I'm under the impression that, the Mets could easily replace him, even if they don't get like comparable price. They get like price asset types that I would be fine with that. My big thing is what big back do you want? Because honestly, when we played the Braves in September, all their guys had over 20 runs. Granted, I know Marcelo Ozuna, not my OTP guy, other guy, but they all had the threat of hitting a 3-run home run. The Mets didn't have that last year, and that wins World Series championships. So, other than the pitching, which I know is really important, are there any kind of sleeper kind of sluggers that you could see possibly going in the trade market come January, February?
Trade market's really tough to gauge. We just found out Brian Reynolds requested a trade. Apparently that's brand new information. So it's tough in the trade market, but I want Aaron Judge. I don't care about the Yankees. That means nothing to me. I want Aaron Judge. I would pay the man. I'm not afraid to do it. I know they're not rumored to be talking to him, and maybe they're not. Maybe they won't sign him. But I don't care about all that stuff. I care about the New York Mets putting the best roster that they can to win baseball games in 2023. And to me, that's having Aaron Judge in the lineup. Fallbacks, Carlos Correa is very interesting. He turned down the qualifying offer last year, so I don't think he's attached to draft pick compensation. And then something we talked about earlier in the show, you could shift Escobar to second base, you could put McNeil in the outfield, and Correa and Francisco Lindor are very, very close to each other. So I wouldn't be afraid to go to the top of the slugger market.
I love it, because now you have the money to shift around, right? That was the big thing, and it's how do you want to use your assets? Now, they're assuming $40 million. Do you want to spend big on offense? And we talked about volume on pitching. Bassett and Senga would obviously be cheaper than deGrom or Verlander and Senga, or something like that. So the mystery slugger is always tough to predict, because a lot of teams aren't looking to trade cheap power before the season. At the deadline, it has a little bit more value. I will stand on the hill that the Mets need to get power and productivity out of one of the three prospects, but guys that have played in the big leagues. It's either got to be Alvarez, Beatty, or Vientos, plus an addition, whether that's Trey Turner, whether that's Mitch Haniger, but the young guys have to supplement this lineup at some point. Buddy, I hope so. I've been waiting a long time. I've been waiting a long time. I love the question. If you're not optimistic now, and I know we're having this conversation the day after Jacob deGrom left though, but with where this franchise has gone, with this ownership, the aggressive nature, the moves they make, when are you going to be optimistic about this team? I mean, we have done a podcast before Steve Cohen owned the team. We have talked as friends about this team much longer than that. Absolutely, buddy. The Mets could win a World Series this year. And it's a great question, because that's what matters the most. What is it going to take to get to the World Series? Now they have to start making those moves, especially at the winter meetings next week, to put that in line.
As currently constructed, no, because they don't have a rotation, they don't have a bullpen. So as of this very second, they are not good enough to win the World Series. But I have full faith and belief in Steve Cohen, in this infrastructure. They're going to spend. This payroll is going to be over $300 million this year. Like, they're going to spend, they're going to bring in quality players. I thought they were good enough to win the World Series last year, but we all know the playoffs are a bit of a crapshoot, and it just didn't fall their way. And I don't think Steve Cohen is going to be content taking a legitimate step back. Is it possible that we look at the roster on opening day and we don't go, on paper, this is better than last year? That's possible, because you lose Jacob deGrom and maybe you lose Brandon Nimmo, but there's many ways to do this, and I think the Mets are fully committed to winning a World Series, not just in 2023, but they have desires to win it in 24, 25, 26. They're not all in for 1 year. They want to be sustainably one of the top organizations in baseball.
Also, great hat. Great hat.
Yeah, great Jets hat.
I second that. It's a fantastic hat. I have an anonymous question. This is not for me, but someone who did want to be on my
Sure. It's your question. Yeah.
They said, why does it seem like every offseason the Mets are kind of entertaining the idea to trade Jeff McNeil? No.
That's right. Boo it up. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think they're so far gone from that. And you're right, it was a thing for a couple of years. You're not trading a guy that's cost effective, won a batting title, is a key part of your team. So I think we're finally past the Jeff McNeil trade rumors.
I think the last time it was seriously considered, and cover your ears, it was going to be in the Edwin Diaz and Robinson Cano trade. Jeff McNeil, that was the last serious rumor. I know there were some fans after his off 2021 season. There were fans that said McNeil's not going to bounce back, even though you just look at his baseball reference page, and the anomaly was 2021. He made that clear in 22. But I think we can close the door on trading Jeff McNeil. I think he's going to be a Met for certainly through his arbitration years. I think he has two more years of control after this, so he'll be there at least for that, and then hopefully for the long term.
I like how the anonymous question drew the hostility out of the crowd. That was good.
Maybe it was smart to not get out.
That's what I'm saying. It was good awareness.
Strategy.
Thank you.
One question I have relates to maybe you said that online for the why did the Mets protect the football and they lose now? The next piece is Alex Ramirez.
great question, and Jake Mangum's a friend of our show. We've had him on before our partnership with SNY, our podcasting before that, so he's a friend of the show. To me, it seemed like a no-brainer of a protection for the 40-man roster, because he's basically big league ready. He's the all-time SEC hits leader. He puts the ball in play. He can play all 3 outfield spots. To me, he sounded like a guy that if they needed a cheap 4th outfielder on opening day, he could fill that role. So it definitely came as a surprise. So I asked some non-Mets people, like, what's the deal with Mangum? Like, did the Mets make a mistake? And I spoke to one person on a different National League club that said Jake Mangum has no power, and he probably won't get taken in the Rule 5 draft. So I think the Mets are hopeful that he doesn't. It was definitely maybe a strategic decision, because the 40-man roster space is certainly valuable, but I think they left themselves exposed to the opportunity where they may now, if Mangum does get selected, because it's still possible, they may need to go spend on a 4th outfielder. And with all the needs of the bullpen, the rotation, the change up the lineup, do you really want to be investing money into a 4th outfielder? So I personally think it was a mistake, and I just hope they're right and I'm wrong.
You got a little loud here during the Alex Ramirez part, but I didn't want to forget about that as well.
Alex Ramirez, I would have the expectation he would start in High A Brooklyn and make it to Double A Binghamton by the end of the year, hopefully.
And I know a lot of Mets fans aren't really, fully aware of his skill set yet, because he's played only in significantly low level of baseball. But his toolkit, Joe, is just insane. You're talking about a big kid with expected power. He can run. You think he'll stay in center field as well, right?
Yeah, Alex Ramirez is the best opportunity in the Mets system right now to present a semblance of all 5 tools. And don't get that twisted that I think he's like Mike Trout or the next superstar, but he can hit for average. His pitch recognition skills took a big jump in the 2022 season. He has that raw power like you spoke of. He can run, he can play center field. To me, Alex Ramirez is a guy that right now is kind of being mentioned at the back end of top 100 lists in baseball. This time next year, I have a bet he'll be top 25 or maybe even higher.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the question, by the way. You guys have been great. One more? Yeah.
You guys have one more?
Please.
Could you talk a little bit about where the Mets are in terms of developing starting pitching? Because I feel like that's an area in which they're lacking. Just all these guys get ready to grow up. It doesn't feel like there's really anyone who's standing out today.
Yeah. So for 2023, there's not very much, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. We saw Jose Butto pitch against Philly, and it did not go well in his big league debut. He was not ready for the opportunity, if I'm going to be totally honest. But he went back to AAA Syracuse and posted a 1.06 ERA the rest of the season in AAA. So I think Jose Butto is going to be a valuable piece of depth in 2023. Beyond that, for when you're thinking short term, maybe a Dom Hamill, who I have inside the top 10 on my list, maybe a Mike Vassell. Those guys should start in Double-A. And we saw with Tyler McGill, you can start in Double-A and make it to the majors if you excel, obviously, within that season. But they're getting there, right? They're developing a pitching lab down in Port St. Lucie, which is something that the Yankees have had for a bit, and the Dodgers and the Astros. They're catching up on the pitching side as far as player development. They hired Eric Yagers from Drive. He was with the Reds last year, but previously from Driveline. So you're going to see a lot of focus on the analytical development of pitching. And when you just look at the top of the list, Blake Tidwell was a second-round pick last year. He'll probably be in Brooklyn this year, so he's not like an immediate impact, but he could have been a first-round pick had he not gotten hurt. And we'll always circle back to Matt Allen.
Absolutely.
Matt Allen in the 2019 draft, the Mets landed him in the 3rd round. I personally had him higher than Brett Beatty on my board, who the Mets took in the 1st round. He had the COVID season wipeout 2020, Tommy John in 2021, nerve transposition surgery in 2022. So you wonder if he's going to regain it, but the expectation is he should be healthy for spring training. And he's a guy that right now I have number 10 on my top prospect list, but he can easily jump way up.
And when you talk about those guys, it shows you how thin the system is with arms right now, and why they're so hesitant to trade them.
Keep drafting them.
And why they have to keep some of their picks. That's why they don't want to lose those picks if you go out. And there's certain players that you do sign and you just lose the picks and deal with it. But you're right.
It's a part of the evaluation. That's really what comes down to with this.
Before I let you guys get out of here, I'm going to ask you a question. It's going to be a hot button topic. What do you think the Mets payroll will be in 2023 realistically? Somebody said $1 billion. It'll be less than that.
Yes.
Although, if anybody can do it, Cohen can do it.
330 is where we.
I'm gonna say
over under.
I'm gonna say $318 million.
Okay.
Wow. And what'd you say, Connor?
I said the over-under should be set at 330, and I would go under as well. I think it'll hover closer to 325.
325, 318.
That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money.
That is, without deGrom, that is a ton of money on the table.
If they go for Aaron Judge, maybe it happens.
Go for it.
All the more reason.
All the more reason. You guys have anything else you want to say before I let you get out of here?
A huge thank you to everybody that came out to the Queens Baseball Convention. Thank you so much for asking your questions, supporting our show. We really, really appreciate it. Let's go back.